300 plus miles in the Mizuno Neo Vista. Hi everybody, welcome to today's video. My name is Matt and this is What Matters to Matt. That's right, on today's video we're going to be talking about the Mizuno Neo Vista after 300 plus miles. And I say 300 plus miles because I think we're probably at 320 or 330 miles at this point, because a couple of weeks ago when I got to 300 miles, I shelved this thinking I was going to do the review. It's taken me a couple of weeks, but I couldn't resist taking it out for a few more miles. It's continued to be in my rotation and it will continue to be in my rotation. So a little bit of a spoiler on how I feel about this shoe at this point, but we're going to go over some of my likes, some of my dislikes. Of course, we're going to talk about how this shoe is held up after all those 300 miles. First, we're going to dive into just how have I been using the shoe, where is it fitting into my rotation, and finally, it's going to be up to you on whether the Mizuno Neo Vista is worth your hard-earned cash. Also, I think it's really important to mention that this is a shoe that Mizuno provided me for the purpose of review. However, they're not going to get a chance to see this video before you fine folks do here on YouTube. My thoughts and opinions are my own. All right, so how have I been using the Mizuno Neo Vista? Well, when you look at this shoe, it clearly screams road shoe, and that's primarily where I've been using it. You've got that booty style knit upper, you've got all that glorious soft squishy stack height in the Mizuno Energy Next foam. And you've got a pretty smooth outsole here, quite a bit of rubber coverage over top of that foam, but still pretty smooth. And you got this huge cavernous spot here in the middle. It is a little bit of a rock catcher if you want to take that on the trail. So it screams road shoe, and that is primarily where I've used it. I have not taken this on the trails too much. I've tried it because I wanted to try it everywhere, but the trails, it's a little bit of an ankle breaker. Now, when I'm on the roads or I'm on concrete, if I'm on the sidewalks, it's perfectly fine. It feels pretty stable. It's got a pretty wide platform, and with that Mizuno wave plate in there, the nylon fiberglass infused plate that they've got running through the shoe, it does keep it pretty stable, but it's just not meant for the trails whatsoever. So this is primarily a road shoe. Now, the one spot where I have taken it quite a few times, logged more miles than I would have expected, is on the treadmill. One thing you hear from me, and you're going to hear from a lot of other reviewers, is that the Mizuno Neo Vista is very smooth. That's the one thing that seems to be consistent amongst a number of different reviewers, is just how smooth this shoe is. That translates into being very smooth on the treadmill. Now, normally I wouldn't grab a shoe with this much stack height for running on the treadmill because you've got that extra soft, that extra spring, but for some reason I kept reaching for this shoe, and I think it just came down to the smoothness when I had to log those awful boring miles on that treadmill. So primarily road, some treadmill, staying away from the trails. Now, in terms of paces, that's where this surprised me quite a bit, because I had heard a lot about this being Mizuno's version of a super trainer with all that max stack, and I thought I was going to use this for a lot more faster runs. But primarily what I've been reaching for it for are recovery runs, easy runs, all the way up to a moderate pace. If I was talking about what I think its actual sweet spot is for me, it would be in those progression runs where we start off easy and we get a little bit faster, a little bit faster, a little bit faster, maybe even up to half marathon pace. It does seem to, with that smoothness, it seems to translate into something that you're able to lock into a pace and just go. The faster efforts, the problem with it for me, and we'll get into some of my likes and dislikes, is just whenever I took this out for faster efforts, it just felt a little bit too relaxed. That upper was just a little bit too soft, a little bit too forgiving, a little bit too comfortable. That foam was just a little bit too soft, a little bit too forgiving, a little bit too comfortable. And the outsole was the outsole, not really aggressive at all. The wave plate does really well to keep it stable and does provide some energy return, but not enough to make it feel aggressive. Is able to do it. It just didn't feel like the right shoe. When I was looking to do 400 meter repeats, even 1K repeats, I'd reach for something maybe with a little bit more pep. So my first like probably comes as no surprise, and it is just how smooth this shoe is. I know I mentioned it before, but it's worth mentioning again. You got to get this on your feet. Now, the one thing I will say is that it does feel, and I'll use Forest of Dean runners, Andy, his first impression of this clopping or clapping that he did in his video. It does kind of slap a little bit if you're running at easier paces on the pavement, but it feels really smooth. Again, relaxed upper, soft squishy midsole, really good roll with that smooth speed assist that Mizuno has going on here with their rocker, and that Energy Next foam all runs really smooth. Feeling pretty Canadian at this point. Toronto Blue Jays Grateful Dead t-shirt going on, drinking Tim Hortons coffee, first significant snowfall of the year, trying to avoid the background noise from our neighbor snow blowing his driveway. Okay, since we're still talking about smoothness, a lot of that has to do with that Energy Next foam that Mizuno's put in this shoe, and 44 and a half millimeters in the heel of this. A lot of stack height here. And after 300 plus miles, I will say that it's not quite as energetic as it was when I first got the shoe. It's still great for those types of runs that I'm using it for, and that softness has been really, really good on those recovery runs and easy runs, but it's lost a little bit of bounce, a little bit of pep from when I first got the shoe. One of the first runs I did in this, I did try to speed up, and I ran, I think, what was one of my fastest kilometers of the entire year, surprisingly, in the middle of a run in this shoe as I was going through the gears. But it has lost just a little bit of pep over the time that I've been running in the Neo Vista. And number 2 for me in likes, and honestly this is close to being number 1 because again it surprised me about this shoe, is this booty style construction that we have here. When I see a booty style construction, I'm thinking Alpha Fly, I'm thinking really hard to get into. This with this pull tab and the way this is designed is really, really easy to slip into. Not being able to run a runner's knot through this shoe really had me thinking that I wasn't going to be able to get a good lockdown, but I didn't have a problem with that at all. Slipped my foot in, felt really comfortable when I was out there on the run, and it hasn't stretched out at all for me, which is another concern that I had. It's just been really consistent over the time. It does bunch a little bit up here because I have a fairly narrow foot and I do have to cinch the laces down quite a bit, but no problem whatsoever with that. It felt really comfortable and really no signs of wear and tear, but we'll get into that a little bit more when we talk about the overall durability and how many miles I'm going to get out of this. Now, I know I mentioned the snowplow earlier, but probably the bigger background noise that you might be able to pick up on is my son out in the living room on a snow day, early morning, watching his, I think it's Japanese anime on the TV. So our snowman looks a little, look at his eyes. Eyes are a little off. Dylan, what do you think of the snowman?
It looks good.
Apologize for that if you're hearing that, but the last big like, and this is a little bit more about the aesthetics, and I know that comes down to taste and everybody's going to be a little bit different, but the Mizuno Neo Vista is a unique looking shoe, and that can be a plus or a minus depending upon who you are. And for me, it is a big plus. When I go out there and I run in this, people notice it right away and they're asking me about it. They think it looks unique. Very few times, maybe a couple of times, I've been told that that it's not all that pretty, but I think it is an absolutely beautiful shoe. The blue color that Mizuno's used in a lot of their shoes this year, I wasn't sure I was going to be a fan of, even though I am a fan of blue. Something about blue on running shoes, not always great for me, but I've loved the overall aesthetic of this shoe, and I'm hoping they continue that forward with their shoes in 2025. So number 3 for me, definitely the look, the unique look of the Mizuno Neo Vista. So a couple of more notable likes before we move on to some of the things I'm not such a big fan of. One of them is actually the wave plate in the bottom of the shoe, that nylon fiberglass infused plate. I know I mentioned that earlier, but it does really control the foam quite well. It's not intrusive, it doesn't get in the way, it doesn't provide a whole lot of extra energy return, but I think it does exactly what its intent is, and it's to control this shoe from getting overly squirrely, and it does that really well. And the other thing I want to mention is the weight. Now, this isn't a light shoe by any means, but when you put it in the context of other super trainers out there of similar stack heights with that much foam and something of a more comfortable upper, it fits in there quite nicely. It's not quite as light as something like the Super Blast, but it's certainly lighter than something like the Skyward X. So the wave plate and the weight are 2 other notables for me. Now, not everything about the Mizuno Neo Vista is perfect, and there are a couple of things that I would probably like to see maybe adapted a little bit in the next iteration, knowing that if we make some adaptations, we're probably going to lose in other places. But the first one is that outsole and just the wear and tear. Now, there is not a ton, but I'm starting to wear into the midsole right here because I've been wearing on the rubber a little bit. Yes, that is the outside. I know I have not the greatest running form, and I wear a shoe out right there. And we're seeing a little bit of wear back here in the heel as well. So seeing a little bit more wear, and again, we'll talk about that later in durability, but that's more at the 300 mile mark than I've seen in a lot of shoes. I understand that if they harden up that rubber to make it a little bit more durable, that means that I'm going to lose some of the stickiness that I get in this outsole. And also, if they add more rubber, that's going to add to the weight, and that's probably going to change the feel of the shoe. But if they could do something to make the wear on the rubber just a little bit better, I'd probably get a whole lot more miles than what I think I'm going to get out of the Neo Vista. But who knows? But that's first dislike. Third and final dislike, and probably again be a little bit too nitpicky because this is a running shoe and very few of my running shoes do I use until they're ready to retire for anything but that. I would not use this for walking or walking around or anything but running. If I wanted an all-day shoe that I could walk around in, the Mizuno Neo Vista just wouldn't be it. With all that soft squishy foam that I've talked about so much in this video, it just doesn't feel comfortable. It's soft, it's comfortable, it just feels awkward to get out there and walk in. So if I had to pick one more, and you can tell I'm struggling to figure out what I dislike about this shoe, would be not a walking shoe whatsoever. Stick to running with this shoe. So with likes and dislikes out of the way, let's talk about durability. The main reason why you're probably watching this video after 300 miles, it's held up pretty well. The upper is held up really, really well. I mentioned earlier that I thought maybe it would stretch out, but there's been no holes, no frays, no nothing in that upper, and it hasn't stretched out at all. It feels just kind of like it did on day one. So upper is held up really, really well. I think I'm gonna get a whole lot more miles out of that. The midsole in this shoe, the midsole has held up pretty well. I mentioned it earlier that it doesn't quite have the same amount of bounce that it has when I first got it, but it's still held up really well. It certainly hasn't gone flat for me. I think with a shoe with this much stack height, they're gonna last a long time, but they're gonna lose sort of that initial pop fairly quickly. So still a great shoe, just not quite as exciting as it was day one when I got it. The outsole, probably where I've seen the most wear, and that would be kind of in these areas that I mentioned earlier. It's a fairly thin amount of rubber, even though there's a lot of it. And I'm getting some wear on the midsole, the exposed little bit of midsole portion back here, and then back here in the heel. And I might have to put B-roll in here if this doesn't show up well on the camera, but we are seeing some wear, and I'm just touching the edge of that midsole out there as well. So outsole's probably the biggest chink in its armor so far, but I do think it's gonna hold up for quite a few more miles. Now, if we are at about the 300 mile mark, my guess is probably get another if it stays in my rotation. If nothing comes along and bumps it out of my rotation, I'll certainly let you know if you subscribe to this channel if there's a shoe that becomes my replacement for the Mizuno Neo Vista, but probably 500 miles would be the benchmark for me. If I got it there, I would be incredibly excited. Again, as we move further and further into the lifetime of this shoe, probably gonna move further and further into the easy recovery shoe and less into using it for anything of upper paces as more and more of that energy return goes from that midsole. 500 miles is my best guess, best bet of where I'll probably retire the Neo Vista. All right, so I think at the end of the day, there are a lot of shoe companies out there who are able to put out a really good version of a super trainer, and this shoe is a really good version of a super trainer, but you gotta keep in mind exactly what you're looking for in that category. It has grown so broad. You have some shoes that are really meant for more just cruising miles, and you have some super trainers that are really meant for faster paces. They're lighter, they've got more pep in the step, but this shoe fits right square in the middle for me, and I think it is a good option if you're looking for a smooth super trainer that's going to be able to log lots and lots of miles and be a pretty versatile shoe. That's it, guys. That's the end of my review of the Mizuno Neo Vista after 300 plus miles. If you like this video, hit that like button. If you haven't subscribed and you think you're going to get value out of my content, please subscribe. Comment in the comment section down below what has become your super trainer of choice at this point in your running game. My name is Matt, and this has been What Matters to Matt. And ultimately, I have one more question for you, and that is, what matters most to you?
Step 1, wake up early, gonna rise with the sun. Step 2, get some good, some food in you. Step 3, think real hard about what you wanna be. Step 4, everybody just do your thing.
Wake up, today's gonna be a good day. Wake up, today's gonna be a good day. Wake up, today's gonna be